How's it going, YouTube? Coming to you today with another video, and today, guys, the brand new is going to be where to Handtrap post Rota. I know that everyone's been waiting on this video, and it's one thing that I've just been waiting to put out. It's been a lot of information that I've had to put together, and I hope that you guys really enjoy it because it is so information dense that you don't even know till we get into it. And I really do hope that you enjoy this because there's a lot to get into. But if you haven't already checked out my sponsors over at Imperium, Dragonshield, Gem, Cloud, RW, or Grimoire, definitely go down below in the description. Check them all out. Follow my Twitter, follow my Twitch, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already for more amazing where to Handtrap guides. And if this video can get at least 1,000 likes on it, I'm going to start doing the part 2, maybe even a part 3 further out. I really do appreciate it, and the series is going to keep on continuing because I want to make sure that all of you are as prepared as possible. And I know a lot of you are really busy with work, and a lot of you have just so many other things going on that you can't just spend 10,000 hours on DB dealing with runic stun and people that don't know how cards work. So that's one thing where I will endure all that and get the information for you and portray it in a video that's really easily digestible. And, you know, this is what I do. This is what I enjoy doing. So I appreciate each and every one of you. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're trying to push for 30,000 subscribers. That would be amazing. Without further ado, let's hop right in to the video. So the first thing I'm going to bring up is Mermail. Now, this conversation is crazy because a lot of people have been talking about how much they love Mermail. And I get it. I played the deck. I owned it 4 times. And it doesn't mean that I hate a deck when I tell you that it's just straight up bad. But a lot of times the deck is just bad. Like this deck, I don't think it's that good. But you also have to realize that we're not in a diverse meta. I had some people trying to comment that it was a diverse meta. Do you understand how strong Azamina Fiendsmith Snake Eye is? You're going to just be able to tell by the size of the slide. It's just insane. There's so much to know. And even in my build alone, I main deck 19 hand traps. So not only are you dealing with a crazy engine, but let's say that you don't interrupt me or you have 1 interruption, I go off with Witch, I still have 2 or 3 hand traps. So you have to deal with my whole board, which is like 8 or 9 interruptions, and hand traps. So I'm not saying that I don't want to see Mermail do well. I'm not saying that I think the deck is just the worst thing in the world. I'm just saying that the deck itself just pales in comparison to a deck like Azamina Snake Eye. To start things off here, you definitely want to go ahead and DD Crow the Shadow Squad. This is a card that's really crazy, and it can trigger itself, or you can trigger it off of the Prince, and it's really important that when it's sent for cost, you immediately banish it with DD Crow, because cards in a new location will not hit their window to activate. So getting rid of the Shadow Squad when it's sent for cost will make sure that that doesn't go off. The other thing is that you want to be able to DD Crow out the Ice Barrier level 2 Aqua that's able to get reborn off the spell, and that's going to allow your opponent to make a Toad. That's another card that you want to be wary of, because if they're going for that immediately off like a Swap Frog, then you want to make sure that you don't get Toaded out of the game, because Toad is just insane. And also, if you have a different hand trap that you want to use later, you're probably not going to be able to use it if they're going to put up the Toad. So make sure that you are going to go ahead and DD Crow the Ice Barrier if you see that first. But if your opponent leads off like Diva, Prince, or even just Prince into the Shadow Squad is the starter to your combo. So you want to make sure you shut that off. Anemone is another card that's really strong in this deck. Being able to bring back a water, you can also Ghost Ogre this card because the card has to get something back to the arrow, or you can just Bell this card because it's, again, trying to reborn from the graveyard. So really solid hit here. You can Ash the Shadow Squad as well because it's trying to summon from deck. And then you can Valor or Imperium a Diva. And there was some confusion, so I added the extra arrow when I put out the spoiler for the slide. The arrow goes down to the Abyssia when this card is special summoned, because this card is absolutely insane. I think that it's like a way worse build to play this card, but sometimes you'll see it where this card is just like plus 1,000. So you just want to make sure you shop this card if you see it. But most of the time, it's just going to be like Diva, right? Now, Mimighoul. Mimighoul got a lot of new support, but not a lot has changed because the cards are really crazy that they just got, but you still stop the same things. So you're still going to Ogre or Bell the dungeon because it's just a really strong card for them to have, and it's also just a field spell, which we all know how field spells are nowadays. They all have 1,000 effects and they're all broken. So you want to make sure that you are able to stop that effect as much as possible. The most important effects that go off in this deck are Mimighoul Maker and arguably Mimighoul Room, because that's a pretty crazy disruption that your opponent can have. But Maker, you want to hit with Ash, Purge, you want to be able to hit either of these cards with Impulse. I think it's really solid. And then also Mimighoul Master or Dragon. These are cards that you also actively have to interrupt because these are going to be the main combo starters. Now, moving away from Mimighoul.
Whoa, GG. Forgot to elaborate on Dominus Impulse.
Hello?
Hey, it's me, Curity Frog.
What do you know about Dominus Impulse?
Dominus Impulse is a sleeper pick, man. You gotta really read the card and understand what it does.
I think so. There actually is a fun fact that I forgot to include, so I'll go ahead and add that in here. So Dominus Impulse is a pretty crazy card, but shout outs to my teammate Ricardo because he did add in a cool fact that if you activate this card, you cannot activate the effects of light, earth, and wind monsters. So if you Dominus Impulse your opponent and they're on Mimighoul, when they give you a monster and flip it up, the effect can activate because they're all earth monsters. So that's kind of cool because it just shuts your opponent out the second you activate Impulse. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing is that if you have Impulse, you might not want to use it too early if you have a different hand trap because you're telling your opponent that you cannot Nibiru them because you can't use a light monster. So that's also pretty scary, but that's something that you want to make sure that if it's your only hand trap, use it. But if you have a different one, maybe hold it a little longer because you want to be able to put that pressure still on your opponent, right? To be like, it could happen, but the second you use Impulse, you're like, oh, you don't play it. Crazy, right? And you're not going to get away with that every single game because games 2 and 3, they're going to know unless you do the old switcheroo and put in Nibiru over Impulse, which would be huge brain. That would be really funny actually to do as a tech choice. So think about that, little mind games. So going into Yubel, this is the first deck that is going to be a real heavy hitter still. Fiendsmith Yubel. So one thing that I want to bring up too with this matchup is that you still won't be really getting to any kind of new crazy end board unless someone comes up with a hybrid list and then plays the Azamina cards. So I think that this deck is going to be still pretty okay. This is the deck that you want to shotgun Fuwaros against because if you don't, they're just gonna make Phantom immediately and that Fuwaros is never resolving. But usually I like to hold Fuwaros. So game 1, if you just want to shotgun it, go for it because if you're playing this Yubel, they're immediately making a Phantom. So always play around that, but if you're playing against literally anything else, hold it for an effect that actually is going to be allowing you to net any kind of an advantage. But you do want to DD Crow the Solar Rage still, that doesn't change. You want to Ghost Ogre the Nightmare Pain, that card's insane, you want to stop that as much as possible. Or you can Ghost Ogre the Solar Rage because it denies your opponent being able to use that monster to go into an SP, which is always going to be really solid for you. You can Bell the effect of Gruesome Grave Swarmer, which is also really solid, but I really like hitting Chamber or even Yama because if you go for a big chain link and you pop something, a lot of times they're like, oh, look at this, I'm about to get all this advantage off the Yama, then you Bell the Yama. It's pretty rough. You can also Ash the Samsara or literally any target negation that you have onto Spirit of Yubel. You always Ash Samsara and then negate the Spirit. This is huge. You gotta know this. You don't want to hit Samsara with an Imperm unless it's their only card they have, right? Because if they have things like opening the Spirit Gates, then you just watch them bring it back, or any way that they could reborn it, right? So you want to make sure that you actually stop the whole effect, and then stop Spirit from getting the Nightmare Pain. Now to go look at an end board here.
Oh, GG again. Oh my goodness. You forgot. Typhoon is crazy against Yubel. You can use it against Nightmare Pain, which is a real pain if you ask me. You can also use it against Sequentia. It stops them from a lot of things.
See, it's just so small on the top of the screen, I just don't see it. Okay. Typhoon is a really, really solid card. I love Typhoon. I've been preaching this card. I think that this card should be in your side deck next format. I think that it's insane, and you'll see that when we get to the Azamina builds. So Typhoon hits a face-up spell or trap, and you can use it as a hand trap if your opponent controls 2 or more spell or traps and you control none. So being able to use this as a hand trap is crazy, because if your opponent has Deception, they activate the Sacred, you pop Deception, they better have another Sinful that they can send, right? The other thing too is if they have like the field spell and then they have like the Diabell, you can always snipe the Diabell from the spell and trap zone. There's a lot of different things that you can get away with on this. I think my favorite interaction though is being able to hit the Sequentia. So if you are doing a big chain link with your opponent, obviously no spells and traps, you can go ahead and just hit the Sequentia, which is crazy because at that point your opponent's Desiree is completely shut off, which is fantastic. And that is how that works if you were unaware. If your opponent uses Desiree, you chain a Cosmic or something to the equipped card to it, it will lose its effect negation, which is fantastic. But moving on here to the end board of Yubel. So this is going to be like a typical end board. The Unicorn is not so typical, but it is gaining popularity, and that's something that you need to know, because Unicorn right now, and I said this last format, is really strong. If you're able to rip like a Requiem, it's extremely hard to play for your opponent. Like, you cut off access to like a quarter of their deck, which is insane. Because you can hit the Requiem, and then if they play on their turn, or if they hand trap you and you're able to use it, and then you can use it again on their turn, and they're able to rip something else is going to be really important depending on what you play against. It can also be really impactful, like ripping a Princess out. I know I won a game post-Rota already, just in testing, where I ripped exactly Requiem Princess, and it was just nearly impossible for my opponent to play. So if you are looking for a tech option right now, the Unicorn and, of course, Birth are just a crazy interruption. If your opponent starts with Engraver and goes for Tract, they can't do that line when you have Birth, because you can just banish all 3 face down. So they're automatically having to go a different route than they want to, which is pretty fun. Moving on, though, to Memento. Memento, again, they are getting the Goblin card that is like a tenny circle that just allows you to dodge and then get to the Goblin. But that doesn't really change a whole lot. You still stop the same things. Nothing is going to really be that different. You have Impulse now, which can hit the spell, which is really good. You can hit the Darkblade, or you can hit the Gaddock. The Gaddock, as you can see, is just a card that you just want to hit. This card's insane. So definitely being able to just DD Crow this trying to reborn itself is really solid, or just Bell the card, keep it in the graveyard. You can also DD Crow out the Fusion before anything happens, because it banishes for cost to activate, so you want to make sure that you go ahead and just DD Crow it. But you also just want to Ash the Bone Party, or you can Ash the graveyard effect of the Fusion spell, because then it gets some of the cards like Bone Party or like Cranium Burst. So I do like Ash on either of these. I like Ash on Bone Party specifically. I think that card's just crazy. You can also Ghost Ogre the field spell. I love being able to Ghost Ogre field spells just because those cards are crazy, and whenever you're able to do so, you should. Especially just because this one in particular is also really busted. Being able to Ghost Ogre that is insane. And then lastly, but not least, Darkblade and Tatsunushigo. You should definitely Veiler or Imperium. Either of these, it doesn't matter which one. Whichever you see first, just hit it with an Imperium or Veiler. Usually you want to do it preemptively in case you're worried about something like a Bone Party. So that's realistically up to you, however you want to go about that. But I think either hitting it on effect is fine if you're confident that you just won't get Bone Partied, or just hit it preemptively so you can play around that a little bit better. So, Tenpai. Not a whole lot changed here either. Obviously just one summoning now, and there's not a whole lot of difference, but you still want to DD Crow the Bident target or the Fadra target, dependent on which one's more important at the time. Usually it's going to be like the Bident target, but maybe in a late game scenario, the Fadra would be better. You can DD Crow the Heretic Seal when they tribute it for cost, which is really solid because you deny the summon out of deck, which is fantastic because it will be in a new location, so it won't have a window to trigger. You can also Ghost Ogre the field spell. A lot of times now they're actually using it because it's a lot harder to see Engine without Prosperity because it's at 1 and then having 1 summoning. So a lot of times you will see your opponent activating summoning, so it makes Ghost Ogre even better. You can Impulse the Kaiman. You can Bell the Bident or the Fadra. You can Ash the Kaiman or the summoning. And then you can Veiler or Imperm the Pydra. So if you see the larger card and the smaller card, the larger card is always going to be the more important target, and the smaller card is going to be something else to think about. Now, the next one that everyone's really worried about right now, Azamina Fiendsmith Snake Eye. Now, when I told you this slide was going to be gigantic, I was not kidding. There's a lot to break down here, and we definitely are going to go through each and every one of these. I'm going to try to make this as digestible as possible. So, we'll start over here. Mourner, Veiler, Imperm onto Witch. I think stopping Witch now is more important than ever, and I think stopping the Ash is a little less important, because the Yubel Star alone now, as a 1.5 card combo, is going to be able to put up an Omni, and it's going to be able to get you to Engine. So you almost have to stop Witch now more than you had to stop the Ash. So make it a priority to start stopping the Witch, because if you are in draw phase and you have an Ash Blossom and they go Wanted, or if you have a Bell and they go Wanted, you want to go ahead and just slam it and make sure your opponent doesn't get the Witch. Now, it does suck if they get to like Deception, but you also can Ash Deception. You can Ash the OSS, or you can Ash the Wanted poster. I would always try to go and just Ash Deception to make sure that my opponent does not get there, because that is going to be unfortunate if you Ash like a Wanted poster and then they just slam Deception and you're like, well, that sucks, right? We don't like that. So I'd probably wait for my opponent to get to Deception, because they're going to be setting that off of Witch like 100% of the time, unless they hard open it and then they get to like OSS. So they're going to go Witch effect, set Deception, activate Deception, tribute Witch, and then you just Ash Deception or Ghost Ogre Deception. Both very solid, and you really want to make sure that you're doing that. The other thing here is going to be Bell. So Bell on the Wanted poster, or you can still Bell the sequence, which is also going to be very important, because you don't want your opponent to get to Desiree. But at the same time, if you have Bell, try to hit that Wanted poster. It's going to be really impactful. Now for DD Crow, you're definitely able to hit the IP Masquerena still, which is great. Shuts off a lot of interruption on your opponent's side, and that's something that you really want to make sure is cleared. I think, though, between Engraver and Lurie, now more than ever, I think Lurie is way more correct to DD Crow, because if you get rid of the Lurie and shut off the access to a Requiem, you're denying access to your opponent's Scarlet Sorrow, and that's going to be able to dump an Engraver anyway and go that much further. With Sorrow in the format, Requiem does so much more. So I think that you have to stop this as soon as you start seeing it happen. So definitely going about DD Crow on something like a Lurie, you just have to do it. You have to clear it as soon as possible. Impulse onto Poplar. So one of the things that I think is really important about this, and this is a different way of thinking. So what I'll show you on this next slide here is going to be a sample hand. And in a sample hand, you could have things like Ash Bonfire, and if you Imperm an Ash and they slap Bonfire, you wasted a Handtrap, which is very unfortunate, and then they just summon Poplar. So I think that's one thing where you really have to be very specific on how you use Handtraps against this deck. So sometimes right now, it could be more correct to let the Ash resolve. When they have Poplar revealed in hand, you impulse the Poplar. And that's one thing to get the body out of rotation. They don't get it in their spell and trap unless they have Witch in hand, and if they had Witch in hand, they would have led Witch. So it's just stuck. And it's one thing where your opponent just, they don't get free bodies to send either off things like OSS, and I think that's really impactful. So if you have Impulse, I know it's really tempting if you have like Impulse Imperm to just like Imperm the snake, and like you can Imperm Ash, but I really do think that Impulse on the Poplar is just better. It's just stuck, and a lot of times if they can't normal summon, or they have to like normal summon an Ash then get to Poplar, they can't normal again, or if they lead Witch and like Bonfire for Poplar and just stick it in their hand, they have to normal summon Poplar. These are more cards that you're aware of in their hand, and you can navigate your hand traps better based on the sequence that they're going with. These are things that I really want you to think about, because every hand trap in this matchup matters. Like wherever you start throwing them matters. And something like waiting for a deception other than like a wanted poster can matter a lot, because if you wanted and you Ash and then they summon Witch, you're like, welp, that sucks, unless you have like an Ogre. But at that point you could have used like the Ogre there and held the Ash for something different, right? So really be cautious on what you throw hand traps on here. The other thing is Typhoon. Typhoon on Deception's crazy. The other thing I brought up before is Typhoon on Sequentia to turn off the Desiree. So these are things that you can really utilize. You can also Typhoon, and then you can Impulse after, which is kind of nice. It's very limited on the decks that can actually play Impulse because it does shut off light monsters. So think about that. I know on like the pure Fire King deck, they're playing Impulse, but it really depends on what you go with for the format. So World Sea isn't that popular. It's not super popular, but I've seen it a bit in playtesting. So this is like a sample end board from what I've been seeing. If the World Sea doesn't end up becoming meta, just any generic Link 2 that you want up top is fine. Even like a Hida we could see passed on, or like a Raging Phoenix or what have you. But most of the time, this is going to be pretty close to what you're looking at. And the Deception will be face down because it gets reset in the end phase if it leaves the field face up, which is already broken. And the sample hand underneath it, seeing that Wanted, that Bonfire, that Engraver, and that Ash. And there's 19 hand traps in the deck. So there's a chance that they're going to open up at least one of them, right? So if you see a hand like this, this is where if you had like Ash Impulse, you might do really well here, you know, because you're going to see them go probably like Wanted first, which is like fine. They go Wanted Witch, and they have to pitch one of these, which opens up the opportunity if they get rid of like Bonfire because they already have Ash, and then you like impulse stop the Poplar in hand. Now they're in a really weird position. They still have Engraver, so they're still going to put up a board, but it's going to be less of a board than you would have had to deal with anyway. So that's just kind of what I'm getting at, though, is you have to anticipate what your opponent has and know that there's other ways for them to extend. So at that point, like, you could Ash, like, Wanted. Now they don't have access to Witch. And then you have to deal with, like, Engraver and or Ash. So there's still other things that you can do, especially if you still have an Impulse. So they go, like, normal Ash, grab Poplar. You Impulse Poplar, and then all they have left is, like, Engraver. So their board's not going to be that crazy, right? Now for the next deck here, it's going to be Kashtira.
Hold on, GGGG. I'm going to take over this one. All right. So,
Okay.
you know, Kashtira, nobody likes it. You know, I've played my fair share of games against it. You know, there's a notorious player at our locals that, you know, plays the deck too much. Anyways, that's beside the point. You're going to want to use Ghost Ogre Snow Rabbit as well as Bell on Kashtira Birth because, you know, you get rid of Birth, which gets rid of a lot of their damn things, you know, just summoning from the grave or banish, you know, for free, or normal summoning. Bell, you know, just stopping the summon from the grave. You can also use Typhoon against Birth, you know, it's just another option instead of just, you know, using a hand trap. You're going to want to use Ash Blossom on Pressure Planet Wraithsoth, Kashtira Theosis, and Prosperity. You know, those are some really problematic cards in this deck. Wraithsoft just helps start off their combo sometimes, and you just want to stop them from getting that kind of advantage. Theosis, you know, they have to open up one of the monsters, and then they have to use Theosis, so it's not as big of a problem. But the main problem is Unicorn. You're going to want to use your Targeting Negation, Ghost Mourner, Veiler, and Imperm on it, so, you know, to stop them from getting to those nasty spells like Birth, Wraithsoft, and Theosis. But yeah, you know, I like personally I like saving my Imperm for like their end board, like Shang, or like other annoying little things. Well, that's it for me. Go ahead, GG.
Do you ever watch the Word of Hand Traps? Is that why you stay up on the game? You enjoy the game?
It's all right, you know. Kind of a busy guy. Let's do my froggy things. Yu-Gi-Oh is just not as a former shell of what it once was for me.
Well, I do appreciate it. You did a pretty good job in Kashtira. I'm going to add a couple things here, alright?
Okay.
So, one of the things I think with Birth that is so important too is that your opponent on Cash, unless they put up like a really simplified board, they're always going to like link off into like Heat Soul or what have you, and then use Birth to bring back like a Unicorn or a Fenrir, and then being able to turn off the Birth with a quick Bell or Ogre is really solid because your opponent's end board is literally just like a Heat Soul at that point because the deck doesn't just like spit out monsters like crazy anymore, right? It just does like a pretty simplified board. It's pretty okay at what it does. They don't even play like Big Bang or anything anymore, so they don't get like free summons. So the boards themselves are pretty simplified usually. So cutting off the birth access is actually really good info that a lot of people don't really think about because of the fact that all their boards nowadays usually just get linked off and doing other things, right? Like the Draco Sack line, the Heat Soul, activate birth, bring back Fenrir. And if you just cut off the birth, all they're doing is drawing a card. Like, better have shifter, right?
I did remember the banish effect from the grave. That is a very, very nasty effect, and Typhoon and Ghost Ogre really, really important against that card.
Well, I appreciate that a lot. I really do. And I'm sure that everyone gained a lot of knowledge from that as well. So, we do have Ritual Beast here. Ritual Beast is a very ignorant deck. Just having Shifter, Protos, and every flood that you could imagine in this deck. Nibiru is a very cool card. It is your best friend in this matchup. Make sure you have it. Ogre onto Inheritance, Ash onto Lara, then Imprimer onto Banshee, and then you can also impulse the Lara effect when it gets banished or onto the Nemesis flag when it goes to get summoned, which is going to be really solid as well. But I do appreciate all of you for joining me today on this Where to Handtrap, and thank you so much to our special guest for joining us.
Yep, no problem. Just gotta help out those people that don't know what to do.
Do you have any final thoughts?
Man, I don't like Shifter.
So, do you think that they'll ban Shifter on the next list?
Hell no. Konami is just, they do whatever the hell they want except for ban Shifter.
Well, I appreciate all of you. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, subscribe. Check out my Twitch, Twitter, Discord, Instagram, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Thank you.